Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our GMAT Verbal Refresher class. I noticed many of you are from Canada and the United States, so welcome. Hope you enjoyed the solar eclipse. Today, where I am right now, approximately 99.8% of the sun was covered, so it was dark, but not like total darkness. Well, I'm glad that you actually made it to the class today because, of course, this is much more important. This is your future, right? So let me go ahead and end the poll. Thanks so much for sharing where you're coming from and what you think you might need to do to prepare for the GMAT. I know that many of you have just started studying for the test, so this will be a great introduction. I'm also going to show you some tips and strategies, not just for the GMAT, but also for the entire MBA application. Please let me know if you can hear me well, if you can see my screen, and that means we can get started. You could use the chat box. Okay, perfect. Yes. Okay, very nice, very nice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, I think that we need to address a very important question. That is, why MBA? Let me ask you, why would you like to do an MBA? What's your reason? What's the motivation for doing an MBA? People do MBA for different reasons. What's your reason? What's maybe the main reason of why you'd like to do an MBA? Let me know, please, in the chat box. Okay, for somebody, it's transition between engineering to business, potential for promotion. Many people, over 90% of the people actually, who go to an MBA are planning to switch careers, and many of them would do. Refine leadership skills, get a promotion, advanced career advancement, higher learning. For some of you, it might be upgrade your degree. Many of us, when we gone to an undergraduate degree, we didn't really know what we want to do, and maybe we've chosen a program that was easier to get into, but maybe not necessarily as prestigious, or maybe as highly ranked, or maybe the program that really helps us in our future career. Oh, I'm surprised nobody mentioned make a lot of money, because let's just be honest, the MBA is all, for the most part, it's an investment. It's an investment in your future, and therefore, as an investment, it's supposed to bring back returns, and it actually brings some exceptional returns. I don't know if you looked at the returns of investment. I'm actually going to show you a couple of numbers in just a few moments. But let me give you one more reason why you might want to do an MBA. This quote was written in The Economist approximately 10 years ago. And it was basically saying that because of automation and because of a lot of the things that are happening in our world, many of the jobs are being outsourced to machines or maybe to other countries. So as a result, many of the jobs we needed, we no longer need. And that was written before ChatGPT. Imagine how this affects everyone right now with all of the different things that the machines can now do. So as a result, what is happening is there are certain jobs that require more managerial expertise, more creativity, some of the things that cannot be replaced. And these are the jobs that tend to pay more and more. And there's some other jobs that could be easily replaced by robots, by automation, and these jobs don't really pay very much. And that's why our government needs to increase the minimum wage just for these jobs down the road or down the line to actually keep up. And recently, the minimum wage went up in California to $20 an hour. So guess what happened? The unemployment rate went up. And many of the, even restaurants and other places, they actually started letting people go and replacing them with machines. So what's the story behind all of this for all of us, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the story is that we can definitely be in control of our future. And when we think about where to invest, we really need to think about what will help us be in that top green line, essentially top 10 to 20% of the careers that pay the most. And that is why the MBA might be a natural choice, because if something pays the most, that means this is probably something that's fairly unique. I remember back in my MBA days, I was taking this entrepreneurship class. I was basically covering why do some entrepreneurs and some businesses and some specialists make so much more money than everybody else. And really the idea was they have specialized unique skills, right? So how can you develop these skills? Well, one of the ways, ladies and gentlemen, one of the shortcuts, right? Life's about shortcuts. We all have about 100, 120 years on this planet, sometimes less. So we really need a shortcut. And one of the shortcuts is an MBA. I have my own MBA. I've done it 20 years ago. I personally work with some people who were doing the GMAT and applying to MBA programs. And sometimes I get asked, why would I do MBA? I mean, I technically could just work and slowly make my way up. I said, yeah, that's true. But you know what? When I graduated from my MBA program, I started working for a very large telecommunications company, about 60,000 people. I noticed that everybody on a director's level, which was just one level above me at that point, if people didn't have an MBA, they became directors approximately at the age of 50 or 55. And if they did have an MBA, they generally became directors at the age of approximately 35. So that's 15 to 20 years of making more money and potentially having a longer runway to actually grow to even more senior positions. Now, speaking about the investment, let me show you. Oh, I'm not sure why this slide jumped to this side. So speaking about the investment, here is the latest and greatest Financial Times rankings. By the way, as I'm sure you are doing your research right now, and we'll talk about how to choose the program as well. I mean, I promise the bulk of the class today is going to be about the GMAT, but very few people do the GMAT just because they love the GMAT. Most people do the GMAT because it's a means to get into a business school. So take a look. This is the latest ranking. Financial Times is considered one of the most reputable, one of the most trusted rankings, have been around for a long time. Another very trusted ranking is The Economist. So I'd like to encourage you to at least consider both of these. And then depending on what country you are in, you might have some other rankings as well, like Business Week in the United States, Maclean's in Canada, and so on. So take a look at this salary percentage increase. This is by how much the salaries went up. Somebody who did an MBA. And that's the difference between people salaries just before they start the MBA program and their salaries 3 years after graduation. So basically within 5 years and sometimes 4, salaries on average doubled and sometimes increased by 2.5 times. That's an average. And look at the salary today. Again, that salary 3 years after graduation. An average salary is above 200,000 US dollars. And that's worldwide. Some of these countries are, or some of these schools are not located in the United States. And what would happen if even after that? The biggest returns usually come approximately after 10 years after an MBA. The average salary, for example, after Stanford, about 10 years after graduation, is about $500,000. So pretty good return on investment. Of course, it will require some effort on our side. And that is why I'm so glad that you came here today. And I also want to make sure that you get the most out of this class. So what would it take for you to get the most out of this class? Ladies and gentlemen, participate. Please answer the questions, do the exercises. It's mostly for you. I've taught well over 500 of these webinars over the years. So I know these questions that I'm going to show you, but I want to make sure that you get the most. So try them out, take some notes, ask questions in the chat box, ask questions in the poll. Unfortunately, we can't have all of you on web cameras with microphones just because we want everybody to feel safe, right? So you can say anything you want and you don't need to care what other people think. I do see all of your chats, but nobody else can see that. In our regular class, our 6-week GMAT mastery program, everybody can see everybody else because we're in a small group and we're all there for essentially the same purpose. So how do we do that? How do we participate? How do we get outside of this comfort zone and start learning? We're going to be doing some questions, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, and I will show you some strategies, and then we'll bring it all back to how do you actually study for the test and how does it all fit into the overall application process. So let me show you a question. It's a fairly typical verbal reasoning question. Of course, today we're talking about verbal reasoning. Next Monday, we'll be talking about quantitative reasoning or the math questions. So this type of a question is called critical reasoning. You see a passage, you see a question about that passage. I will give you about 40 seconds or so to try to figure out what is going on there and maybe even try to answer this question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been about 45 seconds. So let me ask you this question. Can anybody explain what role does a statement in boldface play? Here we're given a passage. Everything we need to answer this question was right in a passage. So if you feel like you can explain it, that's great. If not yet, it's also okay. We're just starting to learn. In that case, I have an easier question for you. And the question is, how many times did you read this passage? Please let me know in the chat box. How many times were you able to read this passage during this 45 seconds that I've given you? Okay, so far nobody said once. So we have people saying 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 2, 3. Okay, so everybody somewhere between 2 and 4 times. Okay, perfect. And let me ask you this question. After reading it 2 to 4 times, on a scale of 0 to 100, how much of this passage do you feel you understand? 0 means I don't even understand what's going on here, and 100 means, yeah, everything is crystal clear. Okay, some people are 10%, 60%. Some people are 5%, some people are 100%. Okay, all right. So everybody is somewhere between 5 and 100. Most people somewhere around 40 to 60%. Okay, so now that we've read it a few times and we reasonably understand what's going on there, let's answer the question. And just to recap, the question is, this statement in boldface plays which role in the ethicist's argument? There are 5 answer choices. Please choose the one that you think accurately reflects what you thought about the boldface statement. I'll give you about 45 seconds or so, and I'm actually going to launch a quick poll here just so that I can see what you're answering. It's been a little over 1 minute, so let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results with you. So as you could see, C seems to be the most popular answer, followed by B and D, and to a lesser degree of E. Whew. Okay. Wow. There's a bit of a disagreement. There's obviously only one correct answer. So not all of us voted for the right answer. I mean, the most popular answer was C, with about 40% of the votes. So let's go back to the passage, ladies and gentlemen. I was asking you how much of this passage do you understand? And to be honest with you, how much of the ethics do you need to understand if you're trying to get into a business school? How much of the topic of ethics do you really need to understand? Please let me know in the chat box. What do you think? You have to be an expert in ethics? Yeah, most of you are saying not very much. So how is it that the GMAT can ask us a question about ethics? I mean, look, I think everybody expects us to be ethical when they're trying to get into a business school, right? But do we need to be experts in ethics? Absolutely not. Why? Because the question wasn't about ethics. The passage was about ethics, but the question wasn't. It was simply asking us the statement in boldface. So this statement in the middle, for although it is true, blah, 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 plays what role in the ethicist's argument. So this ethicist, this person, by the way, who's ethicist? It's probably like a university professor, maybe, who studies ethics, maybe teaches ethics to the poor kids at the university. So this ethicist is making an argument. So what is this ethicist claiming in an argument? I mean, an argument must have a point, right? So what was the point? Well, the point there was that somebody is wrong and the ethicist is right. Whatever these people say basically is wrong. So that's what we call a claim of an argument. And then you can't just claim that somebody is wrong without actually explaining why. We'll talk about the structure of an argument in just a few minutes. So obviously the author needs to then support the author's claim or point or opinion by providing what we call supporting evidence. So that part in bold is actually the supporting evidence. The author is saying somebody is wrong, I'm right, here's why. So that part in bold is here's why. And of course, there are many different ways to do that. The author could provide an example or a counterexample, or maybe draw an analogy, or maybe refer to somebody else's opinion or statistics or facts. So here specifically, what's important to understand is the author said, yeah, there's something I agree with. This is actually true, but these people are still wrong. Very, very high level, that is what we call the structure of this argument. So even though we might not understand exactly what does it mean to praise people to do what's right, to be especially virtuous, to successfully resist the desire to do what's wrong, I still don't exactly understand what that means. The structure of an argument is start with a claim, then provide evidence that the author agrees with, yet disagrees with those people. The part in bold is the evidence that the author agrees with. According to the author, it is true. Cool. Okay. Let's now get to the answer choices and see if this analysis will help us pick the correct answer. The most common answer was C, so why don't we start with C? C says, it is a faulty claim. What is a faulty claim? Now, the author definitely disagreed with someone, but the question was about the part in bold, that statement in bold. The author said, although it is true, so could it be a faulty claim? No, not really. It's not a faulty claim. I mean, technically, it's not even a claim, right? It's evidence, and evidence is not a claim, but yeah, it's not faulty. And that is why C is out. How could it be faulty if the author said it's true? D, it is according to the argument a commonly held opinion that is nevertheless false. Okay, no, can't be false. The author said it's true. E, it reports an observation that the argument claims is false. Oh, I can stop reading right now. No, the author said it's true, can't be false. Okay, so C, D, and E are all out. Now we're down to A and B. Hopefully it's B and not A, because nobody voted for A. So let's see, you know what? we're down to 2 answer choices. And here's what we can do. Since we started using this process of elimination, we essentially got rid of 3 answer choices already. We just need to get rid of 1 more. And then we're going to choose the one that's correct. Right? It's a multiple choice exam. So instead of choosing the correct answer, we can also get rid of all of the incorrect answers. As long as there's only 1 left, it has to be right. So I have 2 answer choices left here at this point, A and B. And if I want to be a little time efficient, some people like to call it a little lazy. It's totally okay to be lazy. You have to be smart lazy. Don't do too much work. Don't do more work that's necessary. I can just take a look at answer choice A and see if it's right. It looks a little shorter. It says, it is a claim for which the argument attempts to provide justification. So that means that part in bold was basically the main point of the argument. It actually wasn't. No, the author used it as supporting evidence to the main claim. The main claim was these people are wrong. I'm right as an ethicist. So that part in bold wasn't the claim. There's a big difference between the claim and the supporting evidence. So A is out. The answer is B. Honestly, if we don't even understand what is B saying, it's okay. Everything else is out. Notice that we haven't spoken at all about ethics. Though we've been quite ethical in doing what we've just done. So that brings us to a fairly important question. I know, ladies and gentlemen, that many of you are probably thinking of not just doing the GMAT, but also doing well on the GMAT. Did you know that you can't fail on the GMAT? The only way to fail on the GMAT is not to take the test. And if you've been to our Master Refresher class, you've probably seen the statistics. Approximately 94% of people who study for the GMAT don't ever take it. So that's failing. If you actually go for the test, you will not fail. And you might get a low score, and obviously we all want a high score. So what would it take for us to get a high score? Well, you know what? I think we can ask people who make the test. And in fact, we asked them, and here's a quote from them. Here's their response. Rather than testing your knowledge of business, knowledge of business, they're not testing my knowledge of business. I'm trying to get into a business school and I don't need to know anything about business. Yeah, that's interesting. Or any other subject matter, including ethics or including anything else that we'll be touching on today. But today we'll talk about some really weird topics. Anyway, this has to do with the business school? Nothing. Because this is not about subject matter expertise. That's why this is a very different test from most other tests. This is a test that's evaluated your higher order reasoning skills. These are the skills that really matter. I mean, what do leaders do? They solve problems. That's why they make a lot of money. They're decision makers. They're problem solvers, right? So when you go into a business school to essentially learn how to solve all kinds of different business problems, how to take the business to the next level. Somebody thought, well, we have a problem. I don't want to wait for a taxi or call these millions of numbers. Let's solve a problem. Let's create an app. Let's go with Uber. Or somebody was saying, well, hotels are too expensive or can't really find a place to stay. Let's make an app, call it Airbnb, and so on and so forth. Might be some smaller problems, might be some bigger problems, might be saving some money for the company, might be creating new products. It all really comes down to thinking differently. It all comes down to demonstrating these out-of-the-box thinking, demonstrating different types of reasoning skills. There was somebody who created McDonald's, Tim Hortons, and they solved the problem. Then they solved the marketing problem, they solved all kinds of other logistics supply problems, and then they employ other people who are making just maybe slightly more than the minimum wage. And one of our students, I was just connecting with him a couple of weeks ago. He's now one of the top guys in Amazon for logistics. And the guy is like in his mid-30s. Just approximately 5 years ago, graduated from a business school, was a new immigrant, came from India. Right? But he's solving problems. He's solving logistical problems, and he's honestly, he's very comfortable in his life. So thinking on a different level, knowing how to solve these problems, this is very important. And that's what you're going to learn through an MBA program. In fact, we at Admit-Master call it thinking like a CEO. You want to learn how to really approach these situations, these business cases, these different sorts of questions differently. And that's what can give us an advantage when we're applying to the business school. Now, you need to have some basic knowledge of some of the middle school and high school curriculum. Things such as a bit of arithmetic, the knowledge of numbers, some algebra, equations, statistics, mean, median, average, things like that. And you also need to be comfortable reading in English, right? So if English is not your first language, it's totally okay. You just have to be comfortable reading. You don't have to be a fast reader, but you need to be an efficient reader. Try to improve your vocabulary, try to read more. This is going to be very important for the verbal section. I know many of us, all we read is just Instagram, but we got to read a little bit more. And this is going to be important. We are reading not to acquire knowledge. We are reading because we want to have a skill of reading efficiently, pulling out what's really important. That's going to be the key to our success on the verbal reasoning section. This goes against what we learned perhaps in our school, because our educational system, ladies and gentlemen, at least the Western educational system, has been created over 150 years ago. And it was created based on the premise that knowledge is power. That if we get kids into the school and we bring them knowledge, then this will take our society to the next level. But guess what? The access to the knowledge has now been outsourced to Siri and Google and all kinds of other software platforms. So now if I want to know something, I don't have to go to the library. I don't have to go to school for 10 years. I can just Google it. But your ability to, again, solve the problems is a skill. And just like any skill, that requires practice. And it also requires, of course, learning some strategies. So for that reason, I love analogies. And you probably know that if you've been in my classes. Reading a book on how to swim isn't going to be enough to beat Michael Phelps in the Olympics. I hope we understand that. And that's why preparing for the GMAT isn't going to be just about reading a book or even coming to a 2-hour class. It's going to be a lot about learning the strategies and then practicing. There absolutely are strategies on the GMAT. Now, let me give you another example. Let's say I want to go in a lake and try to catch some fish. Well, I can go and I can be there all day and catch nobody. And I could see some gentleman or some lady on a boat, maybe just a couple hundred yards from me, catching all the fish. And I'm like, this is the same lake. What are these people doing, right? Do they have like a very special rod or something? No, but they have the skills. And that's why they're getting the rewards. And that's why you see this disparity between people's income. Oh, maybe they're upstream. It's like, maybe. So, but again, that's a skill, right? They know where to be. They are in the right place. So having all of these skills is essentially what we are going to try to develop, because the more skills we have, the more unique skills that are not easily substitutable, especially by the machines, the more rewards we're going to get. This is just how the economy works. The only way to make more money is to provide more value. That's really it, or inherit. Something like that. I'm talking about legal ways, right? Okay, so that brings us back to this GMAT exam. The GMAT isn't really about the knowledge, it's about the skills. And we talk about how do you actually prepare for this test. You may have heard that the GMAT exam has changed. There used to be what we call the GMAT. Now we have what's called the GMAT Focus Edition, which is essentially just the next iteration of the GMAT. So the GMAT Focus Edition is essentially an 11th version of the GMAT. GMAT has been around for close to 60, 70 years. And during this time, there's already been 11 different versions of the test. So now we're in version 11, which is called the GMAT Focus Edition. It's a test that's shorter compared to the previous test. It's only 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it consists of 3 sections: quantitative reasoning, verbal reasoning, and data insights. 45 minutes each section, so the exam's shorter, but it's not less accurate because over the time, the GMAT also perfected the algorithm, right? So now they are able to figure out our scores is basically half the time because they're using a lot of artificial intelligence for that as well. They use statistical analysis. In fact, the GMAT used some of the more advanced algorithms for the tests for 25 years. For example, an adaptive algorithm has been used for over 25 years, and this is a test that's only recently been adopted by other tests. So the GMAT is a pretty advanced test, and it's usually on the forefront of what's happening in the test industry. You can also take the test now in any order. There's going to be one 10-minute break. Certain things were removed from the older version of the test, from the 10th edition. There was the AWA, which is the essay. There was sentence correction, which is basically testing your knowledge of English grammar and meaning of the sentence. And geometry, regular geometry was also removed. Data sufficiency section or data sufficiency question has now moved to data insights, which is some math, some not math. So in the past, data sufficiency questions were all about math. Now some of them are not. Some of them are about pure logic with no math. And all three sections are now part of the total score. They're all adaptive. So they adapt with your based on your performance. Now, what does it mean adaptive? Just in case you haven't heard this term before. Essentially, what this means is that the test will see how you're doing, and based on how you're answering the questions, it will choose questions that are easier or harder. And it does so because it doesn't want to just waste your time giving you a lot of easy questions if you know how to answer them, or a lot of hard questions if you don't. Instead, it's going to try to challenge you and give you slightly harder questions, see how you do, and if you answer them incorrectly, it's going to decrease the difficulty. And if you keep answering the questions correctly, it's going to keep increasing the difficulty. So essentially, you could think of this as, maybe you're going to the gym and there's like a Stairmaster, and you can choose the level. So you can go easy, you can go medium, and you can go hard. Well, there's this machine that just basically has a start button, and it just keeps trying to break you. Right? It keeps just giving you harder and harder difficulties. The response time per question isn't what used for the algorithm. But answering the question correctly or incorrectly is used for the algorithm. So for that reason, every question has a different difficulty. Is this the huge pool of questions? You're obviously going to see just a small number of questions. And every time you go for the test, if you happen to go the test twice or 3 times, so there's up to 8 times that you can take the test, every single time, all the questions you're going to see are going to be different. Right? So that's basically how the scores are determined. And for that reason, it's a challenging test. I mean, it's challenging because the GMAT just designed it to be challenging. It sees what you're doing, keeps getting harder and harder if you're doing well. And of course, it's also challenging because you're competing against everybody who did this test in the past 5 years, and this is how your scores are determined. The different types of questions on the GMAT, there are actually a grand total of 8 different types of questions. We do have some free refresher classes on 4 of these. And today we are talking about critical reasoning and reading comprehension. And in our next mass refresher class, we'll be talking about problem solving, which is part of quantitative reasoning, as well as data sufficiency, which is part of data insights. That's going to be April 15th. If you are curious about what's different about the new test versus the old test, you can go on mba.com and compare these 2 test editions. Also, ladies and gentlemen, please do know that the name GMAT Focus Edition is actually going to go away. It was a temporary name, just to let everybody understand that we are dealing with a new version, because for the time being, there was a bit of an overlap. For approximately 3 months, you could have taken either of these tests. So now GMAT Focus Edition is the only test, so the name is going back to the GMAT. And the older version of the GMAT, which is some people call the legacy GMAT or the classic GMAT or the regular GMAT or the normal GMAT or the old GMAT, is actually now going to be called GMAT 10th edition. And the new GMAT will just be called GMAT. It's a fairly big change between the 10th and the 11th edition GMAT Focus. One of the biggest changes to this exam is that, of course, all sections are now part of the total score. All of them are adaptive. But that also allowed the GMAT to redesign the entire scoring system. So there is no longer a score from 200 to 800. The new scoring system is 205 to 805. It's not a linear relationship. So as you could see, the older score of 700 is now the new 645. The older score of 760 is now 705. And again, they're not just adding a certain number. They're making the scores more bell curved. Okay, if you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'd like to go back now to the GMAT verbal reasoning section. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think is the verbal section in the GMAT hard? Or why do some people feel that it's hard? Please let me know in the chat box or maybe in a poll. Why do you think it's hard? What could be hard about the verbal section? I mean, there's no math, so everything is just simply written in English. And if we're native speakers, maybe we can do well. And if we're not native speakers, then maybe we can also do well because we have to learn English. You know, for me, English is a third language, so it can't really be that hard. So some people are saying, what to read? Not enough time. Passages about unfamiliar topics. Several answer choices look right. Yeah. So far seems like lots to read, not enough time is the most popular answer. And the second most popular answer is several answer choices look right. So sometimes we can even feel that the answer choices are subjective. You know what? Let me tell you something that might be right now hard to believe. But the verbal reasoning section or the answers on the verbal reasoning section are as black and white as the answers in math. Or a lot more black and white than most people think. In other words, there's always one right answer and always 4 wrong answers. Many people believe that this is true in math or in quant, but that's not true about verbal. But you know what? There's still always one correct answer. And in math, finding the 100% correct answer sometimes requires a lot more time than what we have on the test. So verbal is a lot more black and white than people think, but math is a lot more gray. Sometimes we just have to guess, sometimes narrow down the list of choices, sometimes estimate. So that's why verbal is hard, just because the questions are confusing. Sometimes they're difficult to understand, but it's not because the questions are subjective or the answers are subjective. There are 2 question types right now on the verbal reasoning section, and that is critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Essentially, short passages and long passages. So far, we've seen a short passage. We're going to see some more. These short passages, for the most part, are arguments. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, what is an argument? Have you ever seen people argue? I sure have. What does an argument usually look like? Usually people trying to scream, right? Something like that. And if they scream louder, they feel like they're more right. Yeah. But you know what? Most arguments on the GMAT are not going to be like that. And please don't argue with the proctor. You're not going to win. So the arguments on the GMAT are usually arguments made by one person. Have you ever tried to argue with yourself? It's a lot of fun. I try it sometimes. So how does an argument by one person look like? Well, essentially, if I want to create an argument, all I need is to have 2 statements related to each other. One of these statements needs to be what's called a conclusion or a claim or a main point or a main idea. Let me give you an argument. Here's, for example, a very short argument. I'm taking the Admit Master GMAT Mastery program. Therefore, I will get a high score on the GMAT. What's my point? What's my conclusion here? My point is I will get a high score on the GMAT. And what helped me understand that this my point is actually the word therefore. And why do I believe that? Why do I believe I will get a high score on the GMAT? Because of my evidence. My supporting evidence to this claim is I am taking the Admit Master GMAT Mastery program. Therefore, if I am, I believe that I'll get a high score on the GMAT. So far, a very light argument. I could certainly strengthen this argument by saying I do all my homework, I get the right coaching, or maybe by saying that, I have many friends who went through the Admin Master GMAT program and they did really well. So statistically, this program helps people do much better. So very often when you're given an argument, you're going to have to do something with it. But the first step of the argument is always to recognize what's the claim, what's the evidence. Sometimes the GMAT will simply ask you to describe where's the claim and where's the evidence, or like in a question that we've seen about the ethicist, to simply explain whether that part in bold is a conclusion or evidence, and what is it doing, how is it related to other parts of the argument. That's why I was asking, what role does it play? Sometimes the GMAT will ask you to perform some logical operations with the argument, essentially do something with the argument. So let me give you an example of an argument where you might have to do something with the argument. In fact, I feel like it's time for us to do our next question. So ladies and gentlemen, this time I will show you the passage, the question, and all of the answer choices, and I'll give you 2 minutes to do whatever you think is necessary here to choose the correct answer, or to choose an answer. Here's a question. Please try your best. 2 minutes. How are you doing? So this is how much time you would have for this question on the real test. A little under 2 minutes. In fact, the average time for these questions is 1 minute, 57 seconds. I've noticed many people still haven't voted. So at this point, could I ask you to choose an answer? Whatever feels right, even if you don't exactly know why. Maybe just pick an answer. The way the test works is we can't really see the next question until we've answered the previous question. Right? So that's why that's one of the things that we train people in a class is to how to know how to choose an answer even though you might not be sure. Okay, so let me go ahead and end the poll. And let me show you the different ways of doing this question, and then you can compare your answer with actually the correct answer. Obviously, only one of them could be correct. And I'll tell you afterwards what answer was chosen as the most correct. But first, let me show you 3 different ways. The first way is what we call the seems right way, which is when we essentially do what we just normally do in school or in our everyday life. We just read the passage, try to understand it, read the question, try to understand it. It's a little hard to understand what's going on there at first because it's pretty dense and they give us a few facts. And then with the answer choices, try to understand them and see which one seems right. So does A seem right? No, it actually sounds pretty weird. Bronze ceremonial drinking vessels, what does this have to do with, before and after, preceding years? So seems quite strange. In the passage, we talked about the city of Korean, we talked about island, we talked about pattern of debris, we talked about the earthquake, we talked about 365. So let's see if we can find something relevant to this, because we need to support the hypothesis. So it's got to be something related to what we're talking about. Well, B seems quite related. Modern history is mentioned, the earthquake occurred, 365. So far, so good. Let's see if we can find something better. Coins, what does it have to do? I mean, drinking vessels, coins, statues, inscriptions, not really sure how it's related to what we need. So maybe then we go back and reread the question, try to reread the answer choices. And maybe that's why, even though Sergey asked, can you please answer the question? We're still sitting there and not choosing anything because we're looking for answer choice F. Right? And F means forget it. But there's no F in the test. So sometimes we just have to choose. And see, and that also involves our decision-making skills, our time management skills. There for sure will be questions on the GMAT where you look into the question and say, I got no idea. Or I've done my analysis. Now there are 2 answer choices. I'm going to just look at them until the cows come home. But I need to make a decision and move on. So look back in the passage, look back at the question, look back at the answer choices. You know what? B looks the best. Fine. I had more time? Sure. Maybe I'll read it again. Not sure I'm going to find anything new. So that seems right way. Right? Maybe you can relate to this. The next way is, let's call it the learn the rules way. Just basically say, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to see exactly how these questions are done. And then now I know the process. And the process for doing these questions is, I got to read the question first. I don't want to read the passage first. I want to read the question first. Why? Because there are different types of critical reasoning questions. They ask different things. You remember the first question we did about ethics was asking us about the role of a statement. This question is asking us to support the hypothesis. That's a very different question. So what is this question asking us to do? It's asking us to support the hypothesis. It's trying to basically strengthen the argument. So what I'm going to do right now is I'll read the passage and I'll identify what was that hypothesis that I'm actually trying to strengthen. Okay, so the passage says that the hypothesis was the destruction was due to this earthquake. Okay, so the hypothesis, they don't know for sure. I'm going to be looking for some sort of a support. Well, let's see if I can find it. A doesn't seem relevant. I mean, I need some support to, this earthquake basically destroyed the town. How about B? Well, look, if most modern history is mentioned that an earthquake occurred near the island, that probably means it was a pretty significant earthquake. So yeah, so far it does strengthen our belief, our hypothesis that maybe that's what happened. Let's see if we can find anything better. No coins minted? Yeah, sure. Doesn't seem relevant. Small statues, stone inscriptions, again, doesn't seem relevant. And if we learn the rules, we're going to pick B, because it definitely seems like it's strengthening the hypothesis. And after 2 minutes, unfortunately, we're going to choose an answer that's a trap answer, but not the correct answer. The GMAT calls all of the incorrect answer choices distractors. Sometimes they're very obvious traps, sometimes they're a lot more clever in what they're doing. But they're designed to distract us from choosing the correct answer. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage if you know how they're distracting us. So let's look at another way of doing this question. Let's call it the master the skill way. This is when I don't just learn the rules, but I also learn the strategies. I learned how to analyze the arguments. And then I practice this until everything I do becomes a habit, so that on the day of the test, I can do these questions in a minute 57 seconds. So here's what I'm going to do. I will read the question. It's a strengthening question. So I'm going to try to support the argument. But how can I support the argument? Well, the argument consists of evidence and a conclusion. The conclusion relies on the evidence, but the evidence is a fact. The evidence is something I already know. According to the GMAT, you have to be treating every evidence as an undisputed fact. So the only way to strengthen the argument is to try to strengthen something or support something that I don't know yet. And what I don't know can't be in the argument. Because if it is in the argument, it would be the evidence as a fact. So I need to strengthen what we call an assumption. An assumption is a belief that was not stated. It's something the author must believe in order to make this hypothesis or this conclusion. So let's go back to the argument and see, what do we know? What is the argument claiming? And what should we believe in order to claim that? Well, what do we know? Well, we know that there's a pattern of debris and collapsed buildings typical of the towns devastated by earthquakes. So it gives us a good reason to believe that the town was likely destroyed by an earthquake, not by something else. Okay, what else do we know? Well, we know that there was a major earthquake near the island in AD 365. It was right at the end of this passage, and known to have occurred. So we know that, right? Okay, so we know there was an earthquake in AD 365. We know the town was destroyed by an earthquake. And we hypothesized is the town was destroyed by that particular earthquake. So that's what we don't know yet. Was it that earthquake? Or was it maybe some other earthquake? So this is one of the assumptions. This is what we call the overlooked alternative assumption. There are 4 different types of assumptions that we teach in our class. This is one of them. So we're going to be looking for the evidence that says it was that earthquake, or maybe not some other earthquake. That might also work. So let's see what will give us that. Answer choice A. Does it tell us it was that earthquake that destroyed the town if we had ceremonial drinking vessels before and after that year? Not really. It doesn't really make us believe there was actually that particular earthquake that destroyed the town. How about B? Most modern history mentioned that there was an earthquake. Okay, we already knew that. So, that's not what we need. We're looking for something we didn't know yet. Because giving us more information about something we already know is useless. That's not going to strengthen the argument if we already know there was an earthquake. We need to know whether it was that earthquake. C. No coins minted after 365 were found, but coins minted before that year were found in abundance. Oh, that's interesting. So lots of coins before 365, up to 365, but after 365, no coins. Why would there be no coins, especially if they're rapidly just stopped making coins or minting coins that particular year? Oh, that probably means something big happened, some sort of a disruption happened to this town, some sort of a disaster. We don't know what the disaster is, but something caused the town to stop minting coins. So does it necessarily mean it was an earthquake? Not necessarily, but does it support the hypothesis? Does it make it more likely that it was actually that earthquake that destroyed the town? If we now know that, number one, the town was likely destroyed by an earthquake. Number two, there was a big disruption in 365. Number three, there was an earthquake in 365. Does that make us believe more that the town was actually destroyed by that particular earthquake? Absolutely, it does. And that's why the answer is C. And at that point, I don't even have to check the remaining answer choices. I'm done. I got the right answer. Nothing else could be right. There's only one correct answer. So asking me what most strongly supports, that's just a way for the GMAT to play with our minds. There's actually no such thing as most strongly supports. One of them supports it, all of the other ones don't. And again, just for the record, do we know for sure this is what happened? No, we didn't. But do we believe it more? Yes, we do. If the argument was, let's say, 10% believable, now with additional support, it's 11% that we believe the hypothesis. That's all we need. There's only one answer choice that will make it more likely to be true. All of the other answer choices will not. Maybe they'll be irrelevant, or maybe they'll make it less likely to be true. Whew. Well, I hope you have energy for some more questions. Let's do the next question. Now that we've done this question and we understand what is actually what we call an assumption, let me give you a passage that actually asks you, what's the assumption? Here's the passage. Here are the answer choices. I'll give you 2 minutes to try to figure that out. Right, so it's been over 2 minutes. Can you please choose an answer in this quick poll? I'll give you about 20 seconds to do so, and then we'll talk about this question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and end the poll right now. And let's actually see what's going on here. Now, we are dealing with biology and some species. How much do we need to know about biology? Not very much, right? So again, we need to focus on the structure of this argument. Let's see what we were told. Biologists said that species with broad geographic ranges, so let's go with BR, tend to endure longer, let's go with EL, than species with narrow ranges. The broader a species range, the more likely that species to survive extinction. So broader range, survive extinction. Therefore, so far everything was just a fact. All of that was supporting evidence. Now we're dealing with a conclusion. Therefore, it is likely that the proportion of species with broad ranges, so therefore, we draw a conclusion that if it's a broad range, then the proportion of species with broad ranges tends to gradually increase over time. Okay, so if it's broad range, that means gradually increase the proportion. Okay, well, we need to know what was the assumption, which means something we need to believe that wasn't necessarily mentioned in the argument. So let's see what's happening here. We were told that the evidence, if it's broad range, then it's EL and SE. Endure longer, survive extinction. Whereas in the conclusion, we said broad range, gradually increase. So what do we need to believe? Well, we need to somehow connect these two concepts. Because so far, all we know is that broad range leads to EL and SE, but we're claiming that it leads to GI. So that means that either EL leads to GI or SE leads to GI. And that's what we need to believe, because now if BR leads to EL and EL leads to GI, we're good. Or if BR leads to SE and SE leads to GI, we're also good. So that is really our gap here. That's what we're looking for. Endure longer means gradually increase, or survive extinction means gradually increase. And that leads us to answer choice D. If a characteristic tends to help species endure longer, then the proportion of the species with the characteristics tend to gradually increase with time. That is addressing that gap in logic. So breaking it down, and that's why you can make verbal almost like math. We teach in our class a lot of the techniques that relate to the logic, because especially now that on the GMAT Focus Edition or the 11th edition, the logic's more important than it used to be on the previous test. Math was actually more important there and grammar, and now it's a lot more about logic. So now we're getting even more into these formal logic, into different ways to interpret and break down the passage. Because ultimately, everything in the verbal section is about the structure. What each statement is saying is not that important. How are they related is what's really important. Let me give you one final question. Hopefully, we're going to finish critical reasoning section on something a little bit easier. Here's a passage. Here are the answer choices. And I'll give you 1 minute to try to figure out what is the answer to this question that is now asking us to cast the most serious doubt on the marketer's claim. So the question that we did with the earthquake was a strengthened question. Now it's a weakened question. Now, essentially, we're trying to see what will help us believe that conclusion less, not more. Give you 1 minute. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been about 1 minute. Let's discover what the answer is. Just like other questions, this one relies on the assumption that we need to cast doubt on. In the passage, we're saying that target education's average reported score is 720. And in the conclusion, we're saying that you can get a higher score if you enroll in this course. So what's the disconnect there? The disconnect here in this case is the problem of statistics. Essentially, they're talking about the average reported score, and then they're using it to predict your score. But now, what if a very few people, and that, by the way, that's actually a real world case, that the reported scores are based on a very small percentage, very often. And that's why when you see these very high scores, well, everybody gets in, or everybody gets these very high scores. That's usually based on a very small sample. Okay. On this note, ladies and gentlemen, we've waited as long as we could to talk about reading comprehension. Let me ask you. I mean, we've been here for about 1 hour and 10 minutes. Are you very excited about reading comprehension? Let me know in the chat box if you're very, very excited about reading comprehension. Yeah, I see a couple of people saying very excited and many people saying not. Why not? Well, look, I mean, let's just be honest. Reading comprehension is usually boring. It's fun to read. But you know what? There's a way to beat the passage. And I think you might be more excited for a way to tell you that you can actually do very well in reading comprehension. Most of our clients do much better on reading comprehension compared to where they started. And some of them get perfect scores on reading comprehension. So reading comprehension is actually a little bit easier to improve than critical reasoning. Because in reading comprehension, it's all about the skill of breaking down the passage. There are fewer question types. The questions are usually not as tricky as critical reasoning questions. But of course, they require us to read efficiently and pull out what's really important. And you know what? If we want to understand what's really important, ladies and gentlemen, we need to focus on what it will really help us answer the questions, and that is that S word, the structure of the passage, how things are related to the passage. Honestly, if they go on describing some sort of a biochemical process, I would care less about how it works. What I would care is, why are they talking about that? That's what I want to know. So that's why when you are reading a passage, you want to focus on how the author is making a point, not what the author is saying. And if you don't know anything about that subject matter, it might actually be a good thing. Now, in our class, we do a series of different exercises if you come to our program. And of course, we do passages in the class. You have a chance to break down, analyze the passage, take some notes. And of course, we teach you all the skills, and you'll be answering some questions. And we have a variety of different passages that we'll give you in the class. And one of the passages in our book is a passage that we almost never do, because when I ask people what kind of a passage they want to do after we've done a few, nobody ever picks that passage. And that's a passage on astrophysics. And I remember a few months ago, I had a gentleman in my class who was in the 4th year of the astrophysics program at the University of Toronto. And he's like, yeah, let's do this passage. And he's so excited because he's probably going to get all the questions right. Oh, I'm going to show you. And then guess what? He actually got every single question wrong. So upsetting, right? But a good lesson. And that is, we don't need to bring in what we know into the passage. Everything we need is in the passage. And we need to answer our questions based strictly on the passage. And the questions aren't going to be content-based. The questions are really about the storyline. It's about what's really important. It's about the narrative of the story as opposed to the content of the story. So we need to start reading differently. We don't necessarily need to start reading faster. I'm not a very fast reader, but I focus on what's important. And if something's not important, my eyes are going blah, 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 I don't care. Because I have a purpose when I'm reading. And my purpose is to understand a few things. First of all, how is the passage organized? I want to understand the purpose of each of the paragraphs. And sometimes if the author is changing the direction and starts talking about something else in the middle of the paragraph, I want to notice that, because that might be important for my structure of the argument. I want to see if the author is talking about a new discovery. Maybe the author starts talking about some old theory. Well, I want to know why. I don't necessarily want to know what that theory is saying. I might notice how it's different from the new one. So maybe that's what I'm going to notice. I'm going to be looking for some keywords. But I want to know, why did the author talk about this? And that's how I'm reading the passage. I'm noticing the connecting points. I'm noticing these keywords. I'm noticing how the author breaks things down, maybe in the paragraphs and parts of the paragraphs. So once I'm done reading, I want to then summarize the whole passage in 3 more questions. And that is, if I were to write a title for this passage, what would it be? Essentially, that tells me, what is the passage about? I don't want to be too broad, but I also don't want to be too narrow. Ideally, I want to be just right. What's this passage about, and what is it not about? What it's not about, I don't want to include, but I want to include everything that it's about. What essentially was the point of this passage? I also want to understand what's the tone or emotion behind the author's words. Was the author critical? Was the author just simply explanatory? Was the author trying to argue or convince us of something? That's going to be important, because a fairly large number of questions in reading comprehension are going to ask us to infer from the passage. Or, how the GMAT likes to put it, which of the following would the author most likely going to agree with? Well, how would I know what the author is going to agree with if I don't know what the author thinks? I need to know that first. And then I also want to understand, what's the primary purpose of the entire passage? Essentially, why? What was the reason why the author wrote this passage? Got to be a reason. What was that reason? Because there'll also be some questions about that. And also, if I understand the reason, that will help me understand all of these other questions, like inference questions, or maybe some questions that ask me about the purpose of a specific paragraph. So if I do this analysis, I can essentially deal with pretty much any question on the GMAT. If the question's a little more higher level, like what was the passage about? Well, I already know my answer. If the question was a little more detailed, that requires me to find something in a passage, then I know where to find it, because I've noted down the purpose of each of the paragraphs. So if I know that the old theory was talked about in paragraph 2 and the questions about the old theory, I know exactly where to look. So that's how I'm going to be dealing with reading comprehension. I will send you these notes tomorrow by email. So please wait for an email from me tomorrow. I'll include a few more resources and the recording of this class and some other really cool things, practice tests that you can take for free. But this is very important. So what I'd like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, is start reading at least some things with this purpose, with the purpose of analyzing the structure, essentially layout of the passage. And what you realize is that the structures of passages are very similar. If you take a bunch of articles, a bunch of passages, they all pretty much follow familiar patterns. Yeah, there are several types of patterns, but they all follow these patterns. Just like almost any movie you go to see in a movie theater, it has a storyline. And if you were to try to pull that out and compare the storylines, you'll realize actually very similar, right? Maybe like there's a hero that's trying to battle someone. Eventually, the rediscovers herself, things like that. So same thing here. So that's why reading comprehension is actually very predictable. And that's why for me personally, I love reading comprehension. That's one of my favorite questions because I know that I can get almost every question right. It's very hard to trick me. So hopefully reading comprehension is going to be your favorite question as well. So ladies and gentlemen, what's our plan? Where do we go from here? I mean, you came here because you obviously want to improve your career. So let's talk about your career action plan. How do you get to a high score? How do you get to your MBA program? And I'll talk about the application process as well, because I know, the GMAT is just one component. I'm a GMAT instructor, so I love the GMAT. I just find it fascinating how the questions are asked and how they're really trying to engage you and see how you think. But I also understand that other things are also important. And I also understand nobody really does the GMAT for the GMAT. And I can probably imagine that you're doing the GMAT because you have certain career goals that you're hoping to achieve. So maybe start not by just thinking, what test to take or what score do I need. Maybe start by really trying to understand what are your career goals? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to work? How much money you're going to make? And don't just say, I want to make the most. There are different ways to make money. And obviously, if you want to become a CEO, that requires a lot more commitment and you're going to make a lot more. But some people don't want to become a CEO. So decide what is your career goal. Do you want to be a very good technical specialist? Do you want to be a good manager? Do you want to be a good consultant? Do you want to be a good analyst? And then once you determine that career goal, and I'd like to encourage you to network with people. Go on LinkedIn, go on a lot of coffee chats, go and meet with people who already have an MBA. Don't just talk to people who don't have an MBA. If you're trying to assess whether there's a value of an MBA, you got to talk to people who have an MBA. Because people who don't have an MBA don't know anything about the value. Right? Obviously, they don't have it. It's kind of like people who don't have a dog ask, or people who don't have children ask, what do you think? Should I have children? Right? So connect with these people and see how the MBA helped them, and see if the MBA might potentially help you get to your career goals. Because I know, according to statistics, 94% of people who study for the test don't take it. So that probably means they haven't defined their career goals. They just said, I need the test. Okay, so what? It's a hard test. Yeah, it requires a lot of commitment, time and money. And it's not a cheap test either. So, what would ensure that you actually take this test and do well? That's the starting point, which is your career goals. Get excited about them. And afterwards, try to understand what skills do I need to develop to get there. I mean, if I want to be a very good engineer, that's great. I mean, we need a lot of great engineers. I need certain training. If I want to be a good project manager, I need certain training. If I want to be a good manager, good leader, I need certain training. And then see what system will help you get there. And as part of this system, could be pursuing graduate level education, could be doing a master's degree. And why do people do master's degree? I mean, we'll talk about this in just a few moments, but essentially there's 3 reasons why people do an MBA degree. I mean, we talked about all the reasons, career advancements and, making more money and so on and so forth. But there's 3 things that people want to get out of the MBA. The first thing is new skills, because the MBA is a very advanced professional degree. I mean, a lot of the people who are really the leaders and the managers of the companies, they have MBA training. And very often you would hear that even somebody who's doing very well in their career, they sometimes need an MBA degree to do even better. In one of our clients who took our class about 10 years ago, did an executive MBA. She's now been named the CEO of Staples. So she was in our class, met with other people. So great connection to have, right? So that's why being in a class, sometimes you're going to meet some really great people, even before you start your MBA program, that will then can become your connections. And she was doing this because she was already doing really well in her career, but she's, I need an MBA to grow even faster. And within less than 10 years, she became a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Right? So what system will help you get there? What kind of people you need to connect with? What MBA program? What will help you get into the MBA program? And even what you're doing right now is part of that system. You're gaining this insight. You're learning new skills. So how do we get to where we want to be on the GMAT, first of all? Let me give you a few tips about GMAT studying. And we'll talk about the overall application process. And we'll talk about different components of the application process. And I'll try to share with you something that you can easily find on the internet. So first of all, the most important thing about the GMAT is to really recognize it's not about knowledge. And a few years ago, I learned how to sail a boat. I always wanted to sail a boat. The actual sailboat that doesn't have an engine. You get on a boat and there's just wind. That's it. So what was the first thing that I did is I had to learn some theory. I had to learn, for example, that the boat can go in almost any direction, regardless of where the wind blows from. I was shocked that the fastest way for the boat to go is for the wind to blow across. I felt like the wind has to blow from the back. That's actually not true. If the wind flows from the back, you're going pretty slowly. If the wind blows across, you're going much faster. Wow, I didn't know that. So I got to learn some theory. But was that enough? Absolutely not. I needed to know how to put the sails out. I needed to know how to ride the boat. I needed to know so many other things. And how did I learn these? Oh, I got on the boat. And at first, I didn't get on these kinds of boats, on these kinds of race. First, I went on maybe a smaller boat, but I went there with people who are going to keep me safe, who are going to teach me how I can actually feel comfortable. And then gradually I learn more and more and more. And no, I'm not an international competitive sailor, but I sail pretty well. And I participate in different regattas, and I'm totally looking forward to doing this during the summer. Because over the years, I've developed this skill. And that's what it's going to take on the GMAT. Fortunately, for the GMAT, it doesn't take years. It just takes weeks, sometimes months, depending where you're starting from. But you need to know the theory. You need to pick up these strategies. Whether you're picking up the strategy from the fisherman, a fisherwoman just upstream from you, or you're picking up the strategy from somebody on a boat, but it has to be somebody more experienced than you, ideally. We're going to actually explain things to you and also notice what you're doing and give you some feedback and suggestions. Because sometimes it's not enough to just see somebody do it. I need to know what I'm doing wrong. That's important. That's why, even though I've been sailing for a long time, every Monday night during the summer, I'm on a boat in a training class. And I get feedback from people who are on a power boat telling me what I'm doing wrong, because I want to keep improving. So that's also important. And it's important to practice. So that's what you're going to be doing in the GMAT. Learn the theory, learn the strategies. You came to this class, you learned some strategies. Hopefully you're going to continue as well. And then practice, practice, practice. What's the first step? Where should you start? Well, the first step is, you could pick up a book about the GMAT, start learning the theory. If you enroll in our class, we're going to give you everything you need. Or if this is just your very, very first step, and you just want to know where you stand, you want to get maybe a little bit of an assessment, then what I would recommend is take a practice test. Here's what I did. Now, when I did my GMAT, there weren't these courses everywhere. There were no online courses at all. And even in-person courses were fairly rare at this point. I'm not that old. I've done my GMAT 20 years ago. So what I did is I took a practice test and I got a score assessment. My initial score was 650 on the practice test. And then I went through every question and I tried to understand, why did I get it wrong? What do I need to do to not get it wrong next time? What do I need to learn? This is very important. And thankfully for me, it was an easy fix. For me, it mostly came down to knowing some terminology. And then I took the next practice test and I scored higher. The second score for me was 700. And then finally, I went for the real test, 2 weeks later, got a score of 750, just top 1%. Here's my official score report. I'm showing this not to impress you, it impresses me. I think that's really cool, right? And because of my GMAT score, I was able to land some really amazing interviews. And I ended up working in finance for a large telecommunications company, which was probably also part of the reason why they interviewed me was the high GMAT score. I did disclose it, but I've also been interviewed at some of the top consulting firms. And the interesting story was that I wasn't actually hired by consulting firms, but they interviewed me. And then when I got to the very last round at these top MBB consulting firms, they were like, which school are you from and what are you doing here? I'm like, really? So what I actually learned afterwards is that consulting firms only hire from target schools. Right? So there's a list of target schools and they would hire you from that target school. But they interviewed me and I made all the way till the last round and I probably impressed them. One of the reasons why they interviewed me in the first place was my high GMAT score. So I'd like to encourage you to think of the GMAT as not just a necessary evil to get into a business school. The GMAT is not only going to help you get ready for the business school, there's a very high correlation between how well you do academically in the business school and how well you do on the GMAT, because obviously the test evaluates the skills relevant to the business school. But a higher GMAT score, a score in the top 10% or better, can help you land some really good interviews. Because working for these consulting firms is very competitive. A person who goes to work for McKinsey makes over $200,000 right from the start, with bonus and everything else. The base salary is about $190,000 US. So obviously, a lot of people want these jobs. So what will help you be more competitive? Of course, you need to be ready for the interview, but at first, your profile needs to look good on paper. And what will help you look good on paper is, number one, go to a target school. And number two, get a good GMAT score. They are looking for the GMAT scores. In fact, we've seen some examples. Sometimes people come to us after they've done their MBA and say, I got to do my GMAT. I said, why? You already done the MBA. Well, I said, you know what? I have a good profile, but the consulting firm asked me to disclose my GMAT score, and they told me my GMAT score is not good enough. That's why they won't interview me. So hopefully gave you a reason. But how did I get to this 750 score in 2 weeks? Well, I'll be honest with you. That's not what I wanted to say. I'm not a genius. I'm just a normal guy. But I was focused for many years on learning these strategies. And now I've been focusing on many years to teaching these strategies to others. I've been very fortunate. I had some amazing teachers very early in my life. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I had this teacher, was my math teacher. Honestly, one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life, if not the best teacher. I was very fortunate. He was my teacher all the way until the end of the high school. And as a result, I competed in some math Olympiads and I did all kinds of other cool things. And I got to a very, very prestigious science university in the former Soviet Union as a result. So it was all thanks to the people who really motivated me, the really good teachers. So sometimes when people come to me and say, wow, this is such a good class. And many of our clients say they had so much fun in class, and this is one of the best class they've ever taken, or I have a really good instructor. Then I'm just saying, look, I've just had some really good teachers. And one of our instructors has been, so we have a few instructors who've been teaching for a very long time. I've been teaching for almost 15 years. We have 2 instructors who've been teaching since 1990s. And before some of you were born. One of our instructors at some point worked for a large company that actually doesn't exist anymore called Veritas Prep. And he was named the #1 instructor in the world for that company when that company was the largest test prep company for the GMAT in the world. It was in the 2000s. So for me, ladies and gentlemen, that's my idea of retirement. I teach the GMAT because I love it. And I love connecting with people. This is the most important thing. I connect with people on all angles in this industry. This is me in the GMAT headquarters. So we go and we visit GMAT. We see them multiple times a year. at different events. And once a year, we would go to the actual GMAT headquarters in Western Virginia and spend some time with them, exchange ideas, learn new things. That's why sometimes we know things about the upcoming changes of the GMAT before they're even announced. So that's why I'm doing this. And of course, the main reason why I'm doing this is to help people like you. And when I see stories like this, so this is Daria. I wanted to show this to you because, first of all, it's very inspirational. And if you go on our Google page or on Instagram, you will see lots of inspirational stories. And we are adding even more. But I love because Daria, she wanted to get into a very competitive program, a Master of Financial Analytics at London Business School, one of the top business schools in the world. And it's a very competitive program and very demanding program. When she did her diagnostic test, she got a score in the bottom 10%. She's like, that's not going to work. I need a much higher score. She was very committed, very dedicated. She asked a lot of questions. She showed up for classes. And in 3 months, she was able to get a score in the top 10%, 700. And as a result, she finished her program. And now she actually works for an investment bank in Europe. And she graduated from the MFA program at London Business School. So it's all possible. And see, when she's saying what helped her do really well, she said, I learned how to think outside the box. I learned how to manage my time and stress. I learned how to think like a CEO. So that's important. It's not just about learning formulas. It's about learning how to think differently. Because here's maybe a shocking truth, ladies and gentlemen. If you want results in the top 10%, all you need to do is do things differently from the other 90% of people. If you know a lot of friends who are studying for the test, who are not getting the results that you want, go and ask them, what are they doing? And don't do it. Remember, 94% of people who study for the test don't ever take the test. Only 6% of people actually will do the test. And if you want to be in the top 10% of these 6% of people, just go and find out what they do and do it. That's the secret. You don't have to figure out many things yourself. In fact, if you'd like to be around these people, what I'd like to encourage you to do is join a coaching program. The coaching program is one of the most cost-effective ways to prepare for the GMAT. Because in a coaching program, you essentially get unlimited support for people around you. So with our coaching program here at Admit Master, the way it works is essentially you come to a 6-week program. It's kind of like a boot camp, fairly intensive, twice a week for 3.5 hours for 6 weeks. You can also do this program in a more slower pace, once a week for 12 weeks. It's a fairly small class, usually about 10 to 15 people, very engaging. Right? If you find this class engaging, well, that class is even more engaging because I can see all of you on the webcam. And you can ask other questions. And I work with some other really amazing instructors. You can come back and retake the class completely free for 1 year, any class as many times as you want. We also give you weekly group coaching hours and 3 personal coaching hours, coaching tutoring sessions. I know some companies, sometimes they go online, they buy this cheap course. They just go through the videos, but when they need help, sometimes it could be very expensive. That company I mentioned, that was 2% of people are reporting, is charging $350 US, 500 Canadian dollars for an hour of tutoring. So here you have 3 hours included. You can take this program in person in Toronto. This is where I teach a class. This is where we have some of our instructors. You can also take this program live online. It's, again, very interactive. Everybody is on Zoom, and we all can see each other. If you sign up for our program, you can get some savings. If you go on admitmaster.com/offer, you can see some special savings on this program. I will send you a link to these as well. And we'll also give you essentially everything you need, all the foundational materials, all the books, all the mock exams. The only thing you need to bring is your commitment and your time. And when you're ready, you'll go and book the real test. So the question is, ladies and gentlemen, how long would you like to study? I mean, that's also an important question, right? Because time is money. And very often I hear people say, you know what, I'm just going to take the next 2, 3, 4 years to study for the test. every year you delay your MBA. If doing an MBA right now is a good idea, try to do it sooner. Maybe, right now is a really good time to prepare for the 2025 application. Many applications, some earlier round applications are due in September. And we'll talk about rounds in a few moments. So now might be a good time. And, sometimes when you go online, you see these inspirational stories. Sometimes people share advice, and sometimes I hear this and my hair goes up. I don't have too much of it, but I'm like, really? So I remember I received in the mailbox this inspirational story from somebody by the name Johnny Utz, who 7 years later finally got a score of 690, and the note said he's not looking to pursue an MBA degree somewhere on the West Coast. Probably wanted to say now looking, but not looking anymore, right? I mean, obviously, after 7 years, who's going to be still looking at this? You're so exhausted at this point. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, anybody can read a book. Now, this is my daughter. She's now almost 7, but she was 1 when she was reading this GMAT Official Guide 2018. So anybody can read a book. But to get into any of your dream business school is going to involve more than just reading a book. You will have to learn how to read efficiently, but it's not just going to be about reading or about learning theory. People who learn the theory get average scores. Sometimes they can get up to the average. To get a higher score, you need to learn the skills. If you come to study with us, we're going to make you work very hard, but we'll also make this process very enjoyable because learning is fun. The only way for us to learn is to have fun. Sometimes I ask people in the class, tell me about the course that you've taken that wasn't fun. And tell me how much do you remember from that course. So that's important to keep in mind. And we do keep track of success of our students. About a third of our students get scores in the top 10%. And given that 96% of people usually don't even do the test, I feel that we have the best students in the world and the best clients in the world. And of course, we keep in touch with many of them. Many of them became my personal friends. So if you want to have a good return on investment, you got to really keep the balance between where you spend your time and where you spend your money. We were doing an interview with one of my friends who's actually a CEO, a very successful CEO. He's just 40. He's a multimillionaire, works for a very large real estate development company. And, he's one of the owners. And he was actually saying, was talking about the return on investment for his MBA. And he said, the return on investment was really great, not only because it was an investment in me, but because of, and he gave several other reasons, but because you're investing in you, that's the best thing that you can do, right? Invest in a car, the car's going to break down. Invest in a house, that's great. You need a place to live, and hopefully that house is going to appreciate in value, but you yourself will appreciate in value even more if you do an MBA. And the first step, of course, is prepare for the GMAT. So one final thing, a little bit of a shameless plug. If you'd like to study with us, we're very passionate about helping you. We're a medium-sized company, so we work with every client individually. We work with just a few hundred clients a year, and we're very friendly. We really build a relationship with every one of our clients. There are some self-study programs, so certainly if you are not able to come to a live class, that's we also recommend. We work with a lot of private clients as well, so if you have a larger budget and you have a little bit less flexible schedule, then certainly working with our instructors one-on-one is also an option. And there's some hybrid options where you can watch some recordings as well as get some support. You can see all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. If you have any questions afterwards, let me know. We are going to talk about, for the next 20 minutes or so, about what else is required to get into the business school. I'll give you some tips and strategies. But I'd like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, just don't sell yourself short. You have the potential. The business schools, they're looking for people with leadership potential. When people come to us, we interview every person who comes to our live program. And we want to see, do you have the potential? Do you have the motivation? And maybe we can motivate you. That's why when we talk about the GMAT class, one of the first things I ask you is, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? I want to know you're there for the right reason. So if you'd like to have this discussion, send me your resume and let's talk. In fact, here I've launched just a very quick poll. So if you'd like to talk a little bit more one-on-one, maybe you'd like to see some demos or some self-study programs, just let me know. I'll be happy to help, and I'll connect with you personally. If you haven't been to our Master Refresher class, the next one's next Monday. We actually have a live class that started this weekend. You can still join that class. We'll send you a recording of these classes. It's okay if you missed the first weekend. You can certainly still join if you're on a slightly tighter schedule. We'll talk about your timelines as well. The next class that's going to be on weeknights, on evenings, is starting at the end of the Mass on April 30th. You can also take a practice test and try gmat.com. Basically, you can find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. And then tomorrow, I'm going to send you an email. You can just respond back to me with any questions you have. I'll be happy to help. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please let me know in the chat box, a Q&A box. I want to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about the most important question here that we actually need to address. And that is, once I decided what do I want to do in my career, is how do I choose what program's right for me? Because choosing the right program is very important. Very often you would hear people saying that the MBA is one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your life. And the MBA is actually going to be the second biggest purchase in your life, probably after your house. But you know what? You buy a house and you don't like your neighbors, you don't like the neighborhood, you want to move somewhere, hopefully it appreciates, you just sell it, go to the next one. But if you do an MBA and you don't like it, you can't sell it. So it's very important that you choose a program that would really help you get to where you want to go. And if you're still discovering where you want to go, then there are programs that can help you discover that. So the important question is, how do I choose that program that's a very good fit? Because when you're applying to the business school will essentially ask you, why do you think it's a good fit? Why do you want to come to our program? Because business schools don't just want you to go to a program. They want you to explain why you want to go to their program. And let me ask you, does it even matter where you do your MBA? Does it matter what school you choose? I mean, they all pretty much use the same cases, the same books. They all provide an MBA degree, and many of them are accredited to provide an MBA degree or an official master's diploma or degree. So why does it matter? What do you think? Let me know in the chat box. Why does it matter to choose the school? Does it even matter? So let me give you a quote from The Economist. And it's essentially saying this. When you go into a business school, you're getting a few things. You're getting the skills, as we started with when we started talking about the GMAT, but you also get in two more things. Number two, you get in the network. You get in the people who are going to be your lifelong friends. Going to be people who are going to be calling upon you, or you're going to be calling upon them. If you need to work on a new project, you can connect with people and they're going to be your trusted network. Some of these people you can't meet otherwise. How might you meet the CEO of Staples? If not in the GMAT class, only in the MBA program, right? Or you have to maybe be a neighbor. But you can choose your network. And number three is you're choosing the brand of the school. And guess what? The schools are very protective of their brands. So how do they select people? They select people who could have the potential to be very successful, because they want their school to be associated with the success of their alumni. And that's how the rankings work. The rankings, for the most part, are based on the success of the alumni, and also on the quality of teaching and the research and other things in the school itself. But the success of the alumni is a huge part of the ranking. And certainly when you look at the ranking, that's what you're going to be looking for, right? I mean, you really care how many publications will a certain professor do? Maybe not that much. But would you care what was the salary increase at the table that I showed you? Yeah, absolutely. You do care because it's very close to you. So that is why going to a school that's very selective, has a very tough selection process, is something that you should strive for if you really want to accelerate your career. Because going through this selection process will essentially tell your future employers that you are a very competitive candidate, that you're the best of the best. Why would the consulting firms hire from the best business schools? Because they know that people who go to these business schools are the best of the best. Why? Because the business school chooses the best of the best. The business schools spend lots of time and money choosing the best students because for them, that's their reputation. And so that's why choosing the school is going to be very important. So essentially, in this whole process, ladies and gentlemen, the whole process of an MBA is about selection. You want to go to the right school so you can connect with the right people so that the employers can select you, and you want to also have a good experience in the school. It's almost kind of like, getting married, kind of. Right? You want to be with the right people, and you want to have a good time. So how do you choose that school? How do you decide? Well, let me share with you how I chose my school. And maybe that's why I'm doing this work right now. And I absolutely love it. I'm very passionate helping people. But the way I chose my program is I just looked at some stats and said, okay, so which program's cheaper? Now, I've done my program in early 2000s. Some business schools at that time didn't even have a website. So what program is more affordable because I didn't have any savings at all, so I had to borrow. What program's close to my home, so I don't have to move. And I asked around, and I had a friend who went to the school, and the friend liked it. And therefore, I said, well, if the friend liked it, if I go to the school, I'm going to like it too. And that's how I chose the program. And I enjoyed the program, right? And at that time when I was doing, well, there were fewer programs available as well. But what I realized is that for my career, for what I wanted to do, my school wasn't necessarily the school of choice, the target school. I had an opportunity to go to a different school with my profile that perhaps would have gotten me to where I needed to go. Right? And I have lots of stories of people. There was a gentleman approximately my age who went to INSEAD, and we were hired to the same telecommunications company approximately at the same time. When I left this company, I was still a senior manager, and he was already a VP. He went to a different school. He had a different experience, right? So it's very, very important. So how do you choose? How do you actually choose the school? What are some of the things that you need to consider? Well, first of all, will the school help you to get to your career goals? And of course, you wouldn't know that. Nobody can predict the future, but we can look at some statistics. We can look at some stories. We can look at the career path of past graduates and see what they've done. That could be a good proxy to what you could potentially expect in that school. So connect with these people. Just try to expand your network. If your LinkedIn profile has fewer than 500 connections, you got some work to do. Right? So meet these new people. Of course, you want to look at the reputation rankings because they reflect how this school is perceived by the greater society. Generally, the higher the ranking, the better. But again, some of the schools are higher ranked because of certain stats that might not be as important to you. So look at the specific parts of the ranking, specific columns that are more important for you. Filter by those columns. Of course, you got to look at the geographic location as well. If you want to work in North America, maybe doing your degree in North America might be a great idea. If you want to work in Europe, maybe doing a degree in Europe might be a great idea. Or maybe go to a school that has good connections in certain parts of the world. Look at the program structure. Is it a 1-year program? Is it a 2-year program? Is it an executive program? Is it a case-based? Is it the real-life-based? Look at the tuition. And my advice to you, ladies and gentlemen, be open as your finding needs. I've seen so many people make a huge mistake when they apply into the business schools. They just so want to get in that they don't want to tell the business school that they actually need help paying for the program. So when the school asks them, would you like potentially would you need some funding? They'll say no, just accept me, please. But then what happens is once they get accepted, the school says, look, we didn't allocate any funding for you, so just go and find it. And then they're scrambling. So instead, try to be very open. Just say, yeah, I do need the funding. Whether or not you need the funding is not a part of the decision-making process. But the school needs to know whether they need to help you get the funding. Sometimes they'll ask you, what's your credit report? For example, some business schools will ask you, do you have a good credit? But they will help you with that. Have that discussion with them as well. Again, don't stop a higher sticker price of the MBA program. Don't let it stop you from applying. Because first of all, it's a very, very high return on investment. And secondly, almost nobody pays a full price for the MBA. I mean, let me tell you a little secret. People who do really well in the MBA program, people who do very well in their career, they usually want to give back to the school. So they come back to the school and say, look, I became a multi-billionaire. I've started this company. Here's $10 million, or here's $1 million, or here's $500,000. And then that becomes a scholarship fund or a scholarship pool. Sometimes the schools will invest it, and then they're going to get some returns. So they have a pool of money, which is often in the millions of dollars, that they can give out to new people who are going to do the same. Of course, the sticker price on the program, the listed price, would still be maybe $100,000, $200,000. But if you show them that you're very competitive and you're a very good candidate, you might actually receive a lot of this funding. I mean, we have a client recently that we worked with on the admissions consulting side. We do two things here at AdmitMaster, the test preparation as well as admissions counseling. We also do mid-career coaching. So if you just simply need to understand where you're taking your career, we have some really, really amazing coaches, very experienced. Many of them worked at the career centers at business schools. And we had one of these clients. She came to us and said, look, I'm not sure I'm going to get into this school. It was one of the top 50 in the world. She was from New York. Said, I really need some help putting together my story. As a result, we worked with her for about 3 months. She got admission to 4 of the top 20 schools on the East Coast of the United States, all with 100% scholarship. And one of the schools even gave her extra on top of the tuition for living expenses. I mean, that's a pretty good return on investment, right? Working with a coach. So don't worry too much yet about how you're going to pay for the program, for the MBA. Start working on getting a good GMAT score, connecting with the right people. Everything else will fall into place. When you're choosing the program, some of the other things to keep in mind, the class composition. Whom do you want to be in a class with? Do you want the class to be very international? Do you want the class to be more local in nature? How strong is the alumni network? And you can also see that on the ranking. Strengths of the alumni network is one of the points. Or if you don't see that in the ranking, here's a very easy way to understand that. Connect with the people who are already studying the program, with the current students. They're called student ambassadors. And you can either find them on the school's websites, and you can reach out to them directly, or you can go to the school's admissions office and ask them, can you please put me in touch with some people who are studying in your program? And then ask them, what's their connection with alumni? Because you, as an applicant to the business school, usually won't have access to the alumni. But the current students should have that access. So ask them. And ladies and gentlemen, please, 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 please do your research. This is a life-learned decision. This is something you're going to keep with you for the rest of your life. So you need to be very happy with this decision. Again, I've met so many people who were trying to go to an MBA program or choose a certain program, and they weren't exactly sure that this was the right program for them. Very often they chose the program for the wrong reasons. And I've also worked with so many people who, initially maybe wanted to do some program on the side part-time, and they changed their life completely. They moved to a new country. They work for some amazing companies, making a lot of money, travel the world. It's all possible, but you really got to start this process with self-discovery and think about what's really important for you. Start networking with people, start networking with schools. If you are located in Toronto, there's an excellent event that's coming up. Actually, this Thursday is the EMBA networking event. So if you have a little on the higher end of work experience, somewhere around maybe 8 or 10 years or more, come to this event. It's going to be on April 11th. It's going to be a really nice event. And we can also meet there in person. There's going to be more events later on in the year. Or, again, let's just connect. Let's start talking about this. So the question is, ladies and gentlemen, how soon should you start this process? Well, as you probably know, many business schools have rounds. And generally, the earlier you apply, the better. But if you have a really good profile, you can even apply later. This is very personal. Generally, the best advice is apply when you're ready. For some of you, it might be round one. For some of you, it might be later round. Some schools don't have rounds. Some schools advertise rounds, but they don't really have them. So if you want to know a little bit more about rounds, about when to apply, please connect with me. I'll be happy to help. You can schedule a 20-minute consultation on our website, admitmaster.com, and let's start working towards it. If this is really important to you. And remember that it takes on average 3 to 4 months to prepare for the GMAT, especially if you want to get a very high score. So if you're thinking of starting your MBA program in 2025, now would be a really good time to start. A really good time. And I'm grateful that they came here today. Take a practice test if you'd like to see where you are. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a test of intelligence. It's not an IQ test. This is a test of commitment. If you want to do well, you just have to be committed. Need to meet with the right people. MBA and business and leadership is all about networking. So if you feel uncomfortable being around other people, you got to think whether either this is the right career for you, or if maybe you need to start doing something to get outside of your comfort zone and start talking to people. I'm naturally an introvert, but I've learned how to be a public speaker. Sometimes I talk in front of a couple hundred people at different conferences. I love doing these workshops. So I've overcome some of the things that perhaps for me was my comfort zone that didn't serve me. So start working on that. And let's connect. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. And we'll send you an email with all kinds of different links and resources tomorrow. So please look for that email and sign up for our classes, for our Master Fresher class. Take a practice test. You can find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. You can see different events. You can see the links to this event, the premier EMBA event in Toronto that I mentioned. You can see the link to the practice test. You can see the link to some discounts on our classes. You'll find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure spending these 2 hours with you. I'm certainly very excited about the place where you are right now. You are now about to make a very important step in your life. And I've been so fortunate working with people who just completely changed their life and just say, this was the best decision, or one of the best decisions I've ever done in my life. Right? And many of them are my personal friends now, because they feel like I contributed something to their life, and many of them now contribute something to others. I remember we had a client. She was so afraid of math, and she was just couldn't do it. And now I spoke with her recently. She did her MBA about 10 years ago. She was in our program about 12, 13 years. And she was just saying she's now teaching kids how to think logically in math. She's like, the schools don't really teach that. Says, I prepare kids for Olympiads, for math Olympiads. So there's so many things you can do in this life. We all have the potential. We just need to have the right motivation and the right people. So thanks so much. I see a few comments in the chat, a few kind words. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I'd love for us to chat. So please don't be a stranger. Please connect. Let's talk again. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, please don't give up on your dreams. Everything is possible if you have the right system to get there. Take care and all the best.